commentary and insight about the day's financial news on his show, Cavuto. His program brings together the nation's biggest names in business and politics, and he's here to talk about our country's current economic crisis. From the Fox Business Network, please welcome the always positive, always nice, I think, Neil Cavuto. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Sit right here. I'm right. You're positive.
Wow.
Optimistic.
I don't get an audience like this.
No, you don't. Now, when I go to Neil's studio, which I do quite often,
yes.
I'm always like the first guest on, so that's why you're first. And
I'm very honored. I'm very honored.
And I always have a good time talking to you because, not always enjoyable, because the news is sometimes as
sure.
sketchy as it is right now, but at least I always get a sense of optimism from you. And I think that kind of positive reinforcement that something good is going to happen sometime.
Well, I believe that. I know it's tough times like this that everyone can get very, very negative. And I always remind people, you know, as tough as things are, you know, we've been through a lot tougher. And we've always gotten through it.
When was that? When was that?
Well, the Depression comes to mind. World War II comes to mind. World War I. My only issue with the way we look at the crisis is that we think we've never been here before, but we sadly have.
And, you know, there are a lot of young people working on Wall Street, a lot of young people in the workplace that really haven't faced, well, they faced 9/11, but that scared everybody. But they have never faced this kind of economic challenge that we have right now.
Well, if you think about it, Martha, the last serious recession we had was back in the 80s, before a lot of them probably were even born, right?
Right.
So a lot of the new Wall Streeters, this is all a new world, but it really shouldn't be. I mean, markets, economies, life goes in cycles.
It does.
This is not a very pleasant one, but cycles tend to move on.
Now, everybody was talking about 2 months ago about that we're entering a recession. Now everybody is talking about that we are in a depression. What do you think?
Well, I certainly don't think it's a depression. And I think we've got to be careful with the language we use, Martha, because I think that the more you hear it, the more you believe it. And I just think, just as a point of comparison, we had close to 30% unemployment during the Depression. Now, many argue, well, Neil, we're going to get there. But we're not there.
No.
And we had bread lines. We didn't have lines for people trying to get an iPhone. So I think that we have to step back and realize, you know, as difficult as things are, the Depression, they were a hell of a lot worse.
A lot worse.
My mother grew up during the Depression, Martha, and said that her mom would make her onion sandwiches going to school. Leaving aside what it was like to be next to my mother in class.
I love onion sandwiches.
Right, but yeah, I'm just saying that it was worse, you know, and I think we need to step back and realize it was worse before we can get a handle on how we handle this.
Explain to everybody your impression of the president's stimulus package that is being voted on and hopefully will be passed. But what do you think about it?
Well, it's a crapshoot, is what it is. I mean, we are taking what will amount to, in the end, maybe $1 trillion, Martha, and piling it up on top of $1 trillion deficit in the hope that it spurs the economy. Now, in blackjack terms, that's called doubling down. And you know, I know some lucky blackjack players who turn out very nice doing that. But it's a bet that this increased spending is going to spur job creation, get people more confident, get them into stores. But this is really, Martha, about confidence. The confidence of borrowers to borrow, lenders to lend, people to feel that they can shop, the stores they visit to feel compelled that they'll put stuff on their shelves so that they will shop.
Right, and we just have to start encouraging spending again, but when you feel that there is no money to borrow, it's really hard to think, well, maybe I can spend, and that's the first step really is stimulating the banks to start lending again.
Well, you know, when the banks once burnt, Martha, they get to be more than twice shy. They'd sooner buy a $50 million jet than they would, you know, lend out a passbook savings account.
Isn't that incredible?
It's amazing to me how tone deaf they are. But nevertheless, this is what happens, and it lowers expectations for whatever money you provide afterwards.
But you know about the jet?
Yes.
The jet You know, they had ordered that jet a year ago or 2 years ago,
Absolutely.
and it's just come, it's ready. Now they have to take it.
But, you know, someone along the process, Martha, should have said, you know that jet that's ready? I don't think so. Not now.
Yeah. Well, they've
But
already made their deposit. They probably paid for most of it.
Well, maybe they did.
And nobody's buying it.
Maybe they did. But, you know, the executives are going to have to go through the indignity of commercial
Don't you want a
travel.
new jet?
Well, yeah, probably it's going at a discount, right?
Well, let's talk about money chips, okay? Sure. Because here's a really good, sensible thinker who might have some really good money tips. Tips for saving, okay? What are your tips?
Well, the biggest one is watch what you're spending. You know, you're very good at this, Martha, just reminding folks there in different income ranges there are different approaches to this. So I always tell folks, before you start willy-nilly thinking about what you want to invest in, just watch what's going out. And if you watch your spending and see where there's likely waste, you know, you're going to do okay. And I think a follow-up tip to that is just start saving small. A lot of people look at this and say, well, you know, I hear that I have to have $8 million when I retire to be okay. But that starts a little bit at a time. And so people get so intimidated, they say, forget it.
And now when their IRAs are in half or even worse,
right.
They've lost money with Bernie Madoffs of the world or hedge funds, it gets very difficult.
It does, but the reminder there, Martha, through all these, through the good and the bad guys, the crooks and the saints, a little bit at a time. And a lot of people say, well, what good is $50 a month going to do me? Well, it's $50 you're not doing now. And then as you get more comfortable doing it, it's sort of like,
grows.
You know, exercise and all that thing, a little bit at a time. People start the new year, I'm going to run 10 miles.
Another tip?
Yeah, the big thing we look for is the fads. Watch out for fads. Don't go for the fads. Don't go for whatever's hot or new or chic. And then diversify over many investments, not just within stocks. But one young woman on my show recently was saying she loves jewelry, and she collects fine jewelry. That is an investment. Real estate is an investment. Unfortunately, my Velvet Last Supper paintings are not, but people look at that as an investment alternative. Finally, and I know I could be hurting myself, Martha, but don't obsess over financial news. In other words, hear guys like me on the air will report and tell you what's going on, but don't get so caught up in it that you're nervous and nut about it. Just see the big picture. Here's the latest. But I know people who don't even know what the Dow is, knowing its tick-for-tick movements. You can obsess a bit too much. The problem with an information age like ours is it's made it a little too easy to be a nut. So you got to calm down.
I heard a really good, funny piece of advice the other week from an Australian businessman, very astute investor. He said, don't invest in anything you can't eat.
I like that. Or drink. I would extend it to drink.
Well, up next, Neil is going to take